We often encounter arguments that seem convincing at first, but upon closer inspection, reveal a hidden flaw in their reasoning. One such flaw is the fallacy known as begging the question, a circular form of argumentation that assumes the truth of the conclusion it seeks to prove. In this video, we'll unravel the intricacies of this common logical fallacy, exploring its various forms, its impact on our understanding of truth and validity, and the strategies we can use to identify and avoid it. We'll delve into the real-world examples of begging the question, from political debates to everyday conversations, demonstrating how this subtle yet pervasive error can lead us astray. Whether you're a student of logic, a critical thinker, or simply someone who wants to navigate the world of ideas more effectively, this exploration promises to sharpen your reasoning skills and empower you to identify and challenge flawed arguments. In classical rhetoric and logic, the fallacy of begging the question, also known as assuming the conclusion, arises when an argument's premises already contain the very conclusion the argument is trying to prove. This creates a circular reasoning loop, where the conclusion is used to justify itself, offering no actual support or evidence. Historically, begging the question referred to a specific flaw in dialectal arguments, where a speaker would assume a premise that had not yet been established as true. However, in modern usage, it has broadened to encompass any argument where the premises inherently rely on the truth of the conclusion. This fallacy can be deceptively subtle, as the conclusion may be reworded or disguised within the premises. However, upon closer inspection, the circularity of the reasoning becomes apparent. Let's consider a couple of examples. Number 1. People have known for thousands of years that the Earth is round. Therefore, the Earth is round. In this example, the premise, people have known for thousands of years that the Earth is round, already assumes the truth of the conclusion that the Earth is round. Instead of providing independent evidence for the Earth's shape, the argument simply restates the conclusion in a different way. Number 2, drugs are illegal because they're bad for you. Therefore, we shouldn't legalize drugs because drugs are bad for you. This argument is also circular, as it uses the premise that drugs are bad for you to justify the conclusion that they should remain illegal. The argument fails to provide the independent reasons why drugs are harmful or why their legality should be linked to their potential harm. It's important to note that the phrase begging the question is often misused in everyday language to mean raising a question or prompting further inquiry. This colloquial usage is distinct from the formal logical fallacy, which refers to the flawed circular reasoning described above. The fallacy of begging the question, while commonly used today, has a long and intricate history that traces back to ancient Greece and the works of Aristotle. The original Greek phrase from which begging the question is derived translates to asking for the initial thing. Aristotle used this phrase in the context of a formalized debate where the defending party asserts a thesis and the attacking party tries to refute it by asking yes or no questions. One of the rules of this debate was the questioner couldn't simply ask for the initial thesis itself, as that would be trivial and unproductive. This rule against begging the question extended to asking questions too closely related to the thesis, as it would essentially be assuming the very point that needed to be proven. The Latin translation of this concept, petitio principii, emerged in the 16th century and can be interpreted in different ways. Petitio can mean assuming or postulating, while principii means beginning or premise. Thus, petitio principii can be understood as assuming the premise or assuming the original point. The Latin phrase itself is a translation of Aristotle's original Greek phrase and appears in his work Prior Analytics. In this text, Aristotle describes begging the question as a failure to demonstrate the required proposition, highlighting the circularity and lack of independent evidence that characterize this fallacy. Aristotle's understanding of begging the question was deeply rooted in his broader epistemology and metaphysics. He believed that certain first principles are self-evident and can be grasped through dialectal reasoning. Begging the question in this context involved mistaking a non-self-explanatory fact for a self-evident principle, a fundamental error in reasoning. The English translation of petitio principii as begging the question first appeared in the 16th century. While the translation has been criticized for its potential ambiguity, it has become the standard term for this fallacy in modern usage. Thomas Fowler, a 19th century English logician, suggested that petitio quaesiti, literally begging the question, would be a more accurate translation of the Latin phrase. senses. However, the term begging the question has become so ingrained in the English language that it's unlikely to be replaced. This historical overview highlights the enduring relevance of the concept of begging the question, as it continues to be a common and often subtle form of flawed reasoning. By understanding its origins and its various interpretations, we can sharpen our critical thinking skills and become more adept at identifying and challenging circular arguments. Begging the question can manifest in several ways. Number one being restating the conclusion. The most straightforward form involves simply restating the conclusion as a premise, often with a slight rewording. For example, opium induces sleep because it has a soporific quality. This sentence doesn't explain why opium induces sleep, it merely replaces the word induces sleep with the less common synonym soporific. And number two, an unstated premise. The fallacy can also be hidden with an unstated premise that is essential to the argument but not explicitly stated. For instance, the argument free trade will be good for this country because it allows for an unimpeded flow of goods between countries, implicitly assumes that unrestricted commercial relations automatically led to benefits for all sections of the nation, a premise that may not be universally accepted. And number three is circular reasoning. In more complex cases, begging the question can involve multiple steps, creating a chain of reasoning where each premise relies on the truth of the conclusion, ultimately leading back to the original claim. This fallacy occurs when an argument starts with what it's trying to end with. The components of a circular argument may be logically valid, but the reasoning is unpersuasive because it doesn't provide any new information or evidence. It simply restates the conclusion in a different form, offering no real support for its truth. The second one being complex question, or trick question, or fallacy of many questions. This fallacy involves asking a question that presupposes the truth of another question that has not been established. For example, the question, "Have you stopped beating your wife?" is a complex question because it assumes that the person being questioned has a wife and has been beating her in the past. If these assumptions haven't been established, the question is inherently flawed. And number three is irrelevant conclusion. This fallacy occurs when an argument fails to address the issue at hand but appears to do so. For instance, in a debate about whether a particular action is legal, one might argue that the action should be legal because it's morally justifiable. This argument is irrelevant because it doesn't address the legality of the action, which is the central issue in question. These related fallacies, like begging the question, involves a failure to provide adequate support for a claim or conclusion. They rely on assumptions, hidden premises, or irrelevant arguments to create the illusion of a sound argument, while ultimately failing to prove anything beyond what was already assumed. By understanding these related fallacies, we can become more adept at identifying and dismantling flawed arguments. This is essential for navigating the complex world of information and ideas, where we are constantly bombarded with claims and arguments that may not always be as sound or persuasive as they initially appear. The phrase begging the question has taken on a life of its own in vernacular English, often used in ways that deviate from its original meaning in logic and rhetoric. In casual conversation, you might hear someone say, "This begs the question," followed by a question they want to raise or a point they want to make. For example, they might say, "The decline in personal letter delivery begs the question. Are open letters the only kind the future will know?" In this context, begging the question is used as a synonym for phrases like raises the question or invites the question. It's a way of introducing a new topic for highlighting a point that arises from a previous statement. However, this colloquial usage is a departure from the formal definition of the fallacy, which refers to a circular reasoning where the conclusion is assumed within the premises. Sometimes, the phrase is further confused with dodging the question, which means avoiding a question or refusing to answer it directly. In other instances, begging the question is simply used to mean leaving the question unanswered without any implication of circular reasoning. This divergence between the formal and informal uses of the phrase can create confusion and misunderstandings. It's important to be aware of both meanings to accurately interpret the intended message. In formal settings, such as academic writings or debates, it's crucial to use begging the question in its proper logical sense, referring to the fallacy of circular reasoning. In casual conversations, however, the colloquial usage of the phrase is widely accepted, even though it doesn't align with its original meaning. By understanding the different ways in which begging the question is used, we can avoid misunderstandings and ensure that our communication is clear, precise, and logically sound. We ventured into the perplexing world of begging the question, dissecting its historical roots, exploring its various forms, and examining its impact on our understanding of truth and validity. We've seen how the seemingly simple fallacy can be deceptively subtle, lurking in political speeches, everyday conversations, and even our own thought processes. But our exploration doesn't end here. The ability to identify and challenge begging the question is a crucial skill for navigating the complex landscape of information and ideas. It empowers us to think critically, evaluate arguments with discernment, and ultimately arrive at more informed and nuanced conclusions. By understanding the mechanics of this fallacy, we can avoid falling into the trap of circular reasoning ourselves and hold others accountable for their flawed arguments. We can also develop a deeper appreciation for the importance of sound reasoning and evidence-based arguments in our pursuit of knowledge and understanding. Remember, the ability to think critically is not just an intellectual exercise. It's a vital skill for navigating the world around us. By questioning assumptions, challenging biases, and seeking evidence, we can make more informed decisions, form more accurate beliefs, and ultimately contribute to a more rational and enlightened society. Thank you everyone for watching. My name's The Big Y. Don't forget to drop a like, and if you're new to the Why Not family, a follow. And I'll catch you guys in the next video.